Behind the bars lies a shocking truth about prison abuse that'll have you questioning everything you ever thought. What is really happening behind bars that you don't know about? Is every myth about prison life true, or is it just over-exaggerated? Now I have my thoughts on the answer to that question. And in this video, I'm going to tell you. Welcome to the Guardian File. Make sure you hit that like and sub button. And share it if you find the video informing or even entertaining. Let's think about all the movies and television shows pertaining to prison that you ever watched, such as Oz, Shot Caller, Prison Break, The Longest Yard, The 8 Mile, no, not The 8 Mile, The Green Mile, and finally, 60 Days In. Now, out of all those movies and television shows that I just listed, 60 Days In honestly gives the most realistic portrayal of what prison actually is. Maybe it's that way because it's a reality show. And when it comes to reality shows, there's no script. At least there shouldn't be. Now, when it comes to those other shows, when it comes to all of those shows, they try to paint a vivid picture of what prison is actually like. These shows tend to focus on the subject matter of drugs and sexual abuse inside prisons. And let's not forget about the violent acts that makes the perception of prison seem like it's worse than it actually is, or more dangerous than it actually is. I mean, which is a good thing, because none of us should want to go to prison, and a part of that would be not viewing prison as a good place to be. So obviously they'll paint it in a negative light. But there's so many other things that go on inside prisons outside of drugs, sexual abuse, and violent acts. Now, in this video, I want to speak on the subject of abuse in prison abuse, whether it's from the correctional officers or their peers, which would be the other inmates that are also serving time in prison. Now, I want to start by asking, what is your definition of prison abuse? Because each person may have a different view or their own definition for what they believe abuse is in prison. Now, as far as my view and my personal definition of what I feel prison inmate abuse is, here are a few examples.
Stop fighting with the deputies! Quit kicking! Quit kicking! Stop fighting!
August 25th, 2008, Men's Central Jail.
Hit him again! Hit him again!
Each click, click, click you hear is a taser delivering 50,000 volts of electricity to an inmate. This is how the 6-hour mass cell extraction of 20 inmates ended. And this is how it started. 65 inmates protesting what they say was excessive force against one inmate by deputies. The inmates say they'd had enough. They refused to come out of their cells.
Now, these are perfect examples, well, at least the first one, where the inmate in the lockdown unit was handcuffed and assaulted. I view that as abuse. Now, in the second video, that video is a team of correctional officers that strategically enter a cell, 5 people deep, to get the inmate out of the cell for whatever reason. I know a lot of people may think, is it a big deal if the inmates want to stay in their cell? It is, because every 21 days in a lockdown unit, legally they're supposed to move to another cell. They can't stay in the same cell throughout their whole time in the lockdown unit. Now, I don't know the reasoning behind that. I just know that that's what it is. Maybe it's not for me to understand it being a psychological thing. I'm not trained in that. But it is pertaining to mental health, the reasoning of why they have to rotate cells every 21 days. So understand, I get it. It looks terrible. I understand that. But what you have to understand is that, for the most part, those officers are just doing their job. If they don't get the inmates out of that cell, an inmate is manipulative enough to know that he has to rotate every 21 days. And when get out and try to get out of rotating every 21 days, just so he could sue them down the road. And one thing that I did notice that was kind of disturbing in this video, the correctional officer punching downwards towards the inmate, basically punching the inmate. Now, that is not part of the training that we go through when it comes to cell extraction and calculated uses of force. When I say calculated uses of force, there's a plan, there's a strategy, there's a team, there's someone that's communicating with the inmate, trying to talk him out of going any further to prevent them from having to use gas on them, or just to prevent them from having to even go in there and physically put hands on them. We're trained to make that the last resort. And a lot of you will say, I know that, well, hell, if he don't want to move, then why should he have to move? It ain't for us to decide that. Some things are just legal, some things are illegal, and if you don't follow the legal policy, then guess what? You're going to have to suffer the consequences. If that individual inmate harms himself, especially if he ends himself, there's going to be hell to pay. And the best result of that hell to pay would be you getting fired. If you allow an inmate to harm himself, or if he harms himself and you haven't done everything by policy, that means that they're going to blame that on you. So you're going to have to be the one that answers for it. You're the one that's going to be hit hard financially. You're the one that's going to feel the effect. So basically what I'm saying is that we as individuals, well, officers, don't have the luxury of trying to dictate, okay, this is a cause for use of force, that's a cause for use of force. This is a call for calculated uses of forces. We don't have that luxury of being able to dictate or determine that. If certain things are not followed in the policy book or rule book, then there has to be something that happens within the legal lines. And there's always going to be that one officer. It's like there's always one person in every group, whether it's at work or in your regular life. You know, just like the guy that was punching the inmate while he was already handcuffed and lying on the floor. Or kicking him when he's lying on the floor handcuffed. Dragging him down the range after he's handcuffed. Now, that looks horrible on camera. One thing you do have to understand, though, that every calculated use of force is seen by somebody that's higher than the warden. So, when these officers get together and they put their team together and strategize and go through the meeting and everything, they know who's going to see what they're doing. So let's think about it. If what they're actually doing, even though this looks bad, if they know that there's a cameraman literally recording every single thing that's transpiring throughout that use of force, I would hope that a person has enough common sense not to break the rules, go against policy, and do something stupid that's going to end up getting you, in the best case scenario, just fired. Or you can end up with jail right next to the person that you just got done abusing. Now, I know that most people that hear this is probably going to disagree with me. A, because they've never worked in a prison, and you're lucky as hell that you've never worked in a prison. Because this is a place that I would never encourage a family member or a friend to try and get this job and work in a prison. Not if I really care about them. Now, the truth about abuse, prison abuse, is that it doesn't happen, it's not as prevalent as those TV shows, movies, and society in general paints it out to be. Now, it's a horrible place. Let's not get it twisted. It's a horrible place. But it's not a place whereas a majority of correctional officers are really abusing inmates. Obviously, it does happen in some places, but it's not that widespread like everyone would like for you to think. Now, majority of inmates aren't necessarily worried about a correctional officer abusing them physically. They understand that most likely there's going to be a chance that that person that's locked up just like them is going to be the biggest threat physically. Because officers aren't checking inmates' paperwork. And what I mean by that is when an inmate first gets off the bus and goes to his dorm, there's going to be somebody that's going to question him and ask to review his paperwork to see what type of charges that he's had or that got him locked up, or especially whether he snitched or not. If that inmate refuses to show this inmate his paperwork, it won't take long before he gets hands and feet put on him. Or he'll have to, what they call checking in. Have to go to the lieutenant's office and tell them that they don't feel safe in the housing unit. They need to go to SHU. SHU is the federal version of lockup, 23-1. Inmates aren't worried about officers trying to back them in the corner and take their manhood. They're not even thinking about that when it comes to officers. They're not thinking about officers stabbing them, hitting them with a lock in a sock, using any type of weapon against him. Well, unless it's gas. Because that's the only weapon that we have. And we literally just got that weapon in the feds 3 years ago. So all that time before then, no one carried gas. So for the most part, officers really didn't have anything but each other to rely on to protect themselves. Now, physical abuse isn't the only type of abuse that's prevalent in prisons. Now, the type of abuse that may actually be prevalent in prisons is the abuse of power. Yes, there's people in this world that get a little bit of power and it goes to their heads and they abuse it, in turn abusing the inmate that they're dealing with. And here are a few perfect examples for that. One example is The fact that an officer has the ability to send an inmate to shoot, lockdown 23-1, has that power to do it without even having to have a legitimate reason. Whereas, yes, they actually do have a reason. The reason being that they wanted to. They don't like your face, so I want you to go to shoot. And I'm going to write it up since I have to write an incident report that's going to make your points increase, making your security level higher. I don't like you, so I'm going to make something up that's going to send you to lockdown for however long. You don't know how long you'll be on 23-1. And now I'm going to prevent you from either staying at this medium security, or since your points went up, you going back to the penitentiary, whereas the abuse is 10 times worse from other inmates. Another example of inmate abuse when it comes to staff is officers that feel like, okay, I have the power, so I can talk to you however I want, and you better not respond the same way that I had the energy with you. I can say whatever I want, but you can't. And if you do decide to talk back or say something aggressive towards me, I can make up whatever I want and send your ass to lockdown. I don't like you, so I'm going to make sure you go to the most dangerous place possible. Even though I kicked off everything with you by talking to you any type of way and not respecting you as a man or a human being. Now, we do have a lot of verbal abuse that's like that. All right, now to sum it all up, the typical view of what we see abuse, prison abuse as, is for the most part physical. Now, when it comes to that type of abuse, yes, it does happen. But again, it's nowhere close to as prevalent as other inmates physically abusing other inmates. So I beg to you, if your family member or friend that's doing time in prison comes to you, calls you up and states that I'm being physically abused by the officers, please don't automatically jump and assume that he's telling the truth, because it doesn't happen that often. Now, if he tells you that, man, these officers, man, they talk greasy and shit, they're abusing their power. They must have been lames back in school, got a little bit of power, and they want to take it out on us. If they tell you that, it's probably true. So let's not be so quick to believe these TV shows and movies that we watch. They're making everything seem bigger than what it actually is for entertainment purposes. Because there's a lot of people's minds that are curious about how things actually happen behind those prison walls. For the most part, an officer won't bother you unless you're doing everything to draw attention to yourself. See, there's a lot of us that are like that. I'm like that. When it comes to me, if I write you a shot, which is an incident report, you really had to earn that. Because throughout my whole career, I might have wrote 4 or 5 incident reports. Because I like to handle things, in-house, in the legal way, the non-abusive way. So if an inmate stays out of the way, he won't even have to, for the most part, he won't even have to worry about an officer, quote unquote, harassing him. Just do what you're supposed to do and don't draw attention to yourself. Make sure you hit that like and sub button. The Guardian File till next time I'm out.
Stop fighting with the deputies! Quit kicking! Stop fighting!
August 25th, 2008, Men's Central Jail. Each click, click, click you hear is a taser, delivering 50,000 volts of electricity to an inmate. This is how the 6-hour mass cell extraction of 20 inmates ended. And this is how it started. 65 inmates protesting what they say was excessive force against one inmate by deputies. The inmates say they'd had enough. They refused to come out of their cells.